Tonight, we'll learn why some people say the root of innovation comes down to one word: curiosity. It's what drove William Boeing to build a seaplane a mile from here nearly a century ago. It inspired Bill Gates to start a small software company in a former logging town 20 miles away. These two bills helped produce a hotbed of innovation and invention here. As our economy stagnates, how is curiosity going to drive the next innovation in the Pacific Northwest? Welcome to Four Peaks. I'm Hanson Hossein. Welcome to Four Peaks and the Pacific Science Center. We connect with thought leaders as we explore innovation, entrepreneurship, entertainment, and community within our region. Together, we'll ask how these four peaks are changing the Pacific Northwest right now and what's next. I've asked two influencers to help me explore how we can drive innovation by cultivating curiosity. Susan, Greg, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Greg, I'll start with you. You are you write many types of books, but you're primarily a science fiction author. And here we are at the Pacific Science Center. Is there a difference between science fiction, which seems to be a much more creative endeavor, and science itself for you?
I think science fiction can partly be defined by calling it the dreaming imagination of science. So when scientists want to learn something or think about something or imagine where their science might take them, they often turn to science fiction. A lot of scientists have written science fiction, and certainly they like to talk to science fiction writers, especially at cocktail parties. We're among the few that will actually listen to them closely.
That dreaming, how important was dreaming for you as a writer? Is that curiosity for you?
Yeah, it was in part curiosity. It was the leisure to have time during summer to read comic books, to read science fiction books, to read science books, to watch television, movies. I did everything. And starting off reading everything led me to discovering that what you love is the springboard for where you go next. So science fiction was a springboard for me in terms of introducing me to other authors. Strangely enough, I picked up on reading James Joyce from reading a science fiction novel. Or I'd pick up on this particular topic, astronomy or biology, from this fascinating scene in this movie or in this book. I never made much of a distinction as to the quality of the imagination in the media or in text. I just knew that when it was there, it lit my brain up, and I had to go find out more about it.
When you think back to that time as a child, when you had that leisure, what was probably the most important thing that facilitated you to allow you to let your imagination roam like that?
I think core events, core memory moments, the sort of thing that's kind of hard to quantify. I watch a horror movie when I'm 7 years old. I'm in the Philippines. I'm on a Navy base. I watch this horror movie, A Monster from Venus, is on screen, growing twice the size every day. And I go home that night and I have a nightmare comes out of my wall at me. I go, wow, that's terrific. I want to learn more about that.
You like monsters, don't you?
I want to do that. I think monsters are fabulous. Monsters, in a sense, represent the unbridled imagination. They represent change in its most uncontrolled form. And so for a kid, the thought of monsters is, where are our inner monsters? Where are they going to take us? Will we sublimate them or become friends with them? Will we tame them? Will they become us? Monsters are really powerful for children.
It seems to me that you actually tamed them quite early. From what I understand, you actually got into the profession of being a science fiction writer quite, young. You weren't even an adult at the time that you started.
In high school, I had been already trying to sell stories for years, and finally I sold one when I was 15. It was published when I was 16, and boy, could I tell my high school English teachers a thing or two.
Were you convinced at that point that that's all you were going to do for the rest of your life?
I knew that since I was 8 years old. I'd been convinced storytelling was where I wanted to be.
And curiosity and your imagination, that ability to nurture that at a young age, is really what led to that.
In part, yeah, but just this notion of leaving people with their own imaginative visions. If you can give people a sense of, my gosh, that was wonderful. What was that? I want to go find out more. That was what I wanted. And sense of wonder was endemic to science fiction. Sense of wonder was one of the key things that got me into science fiction, was this feeling of, I don't know everything. Boy, do I not know everything. I don't know anything. So where am I going to go from here?
That's interesting. Susan, you have degrees from Harvard, Stanford, Berkeley. You're responsible for 47,000 young minds here in this region. What was your sense of wonder growing up? I said in the intro that you actually wanted to be a teacher all your life. What were you imagining? What were you curious about when you were Greg's age?
Well, I was probably only a year behind Greg in knowing what my life's work would be. I started teaching my stuffed animals about age 7.
And what were you teaching them?
Lots of things. I would read to them, and we would do math and very engaging lessons. Not perhaps the best preparation for actual high school teaching because they were very compliant. They did what I said. It was nice. But I knew from an early age that teaching was what I wanted to do. I don't know what initially sparked a love of education in me. I mean, I can attribute it to my family, my experience with teachers, but I knew it was something that I wanted to do. And interestingly enough, it really wasn't until I was further in my career that I realized what a creative endeavor teaching really is. It is one of the more creative acts that people engage in on a daily basis, and to see a teacher connecting with students is just an awe-inspiring thing.
We're really trying to understand here how curiosity drives innovation, especially in our region. If you look back, both of you, at that sense of curiosity you had when you were free to be curious, what does it mean to you? Maybe I can start with you, Susan.
Yeah, and I think about this a lot in the context of education, is how do we keep that spark, that love of learning alive? When I got my teaching credential, my father gave me a paperweight with a William Butler Yeats quote in it that says, "Education is not the filling of a pail, but the lighting of a fire." And I think that lighting that fire and how teachers keep that curiosity alive is something I fear that sometimes children come to us at a young age, 4, 5, 6, and learning is fun. It's exciting. How do we keep it fun and exciting as they go up through our system, I think remains a challenge.
What about you, Greg? Lighting that fire, I mean, obviously other writers lit your fire. Do you feel there's a responsibility for you to be lighting other kids' fires in your books?
My books don't succeed unless they do that in anybody who reads them, that they have to be, if not inspired, at least they have to be made aware that there's a larger universe out there that's very interesting, and they want to explore that. The whole springboard idea for me of not filling the pail but giving them a chance to leap higher than you've been is where I come from. If my kids do better things than I do and fly higher than I fly, that's great. I want that. I don't want to subdue them, and I don't want to keep them into a dogmatic attitude. But on the other hand, the hard part about teaching is teaching what we think we know, and at the same time giving them the freedom to say, but that's not all there is.
Well, I got to raise this now. I was looking at some of your reviews on Amazon.com, and one review said this Quantico, the book is dismal in tone, and comment in response was, yes, I agree. Welcome to the world of Greg Bear. He's not a raving optimist. I mean, is that what's supposed to inspire curiosity among our young?
I don't read reviews on Amazon because they come from all sources, and they usually haven't read all my books. And so when I wrote my far future books or my near future books, they actually talk about a kind of a biological continuum of joy and sorrow and misery. They usually end on high notes. So in Quantico, I was talking about the next 7 years in our country, and I was writing this back in 2004. And I pretty much nailed it. Economic downturn, major political problems. When I did the sequel of Mariposa, I took it and ran it further and said, okay, we're coming up slowly from the economic downturn, but we have Texas trying to secede and Idaho getting unruly and politics are really changing. And that was published in 2008. And also I was talking about the national debt being a major problem, and that I was talking about that with some people in Washington too, and now that went it just spread like wildfire. So it's really interesting trying to do near future as compared to far future, because near future is a little more disciplined, but also a little more intuitive. Far future, you can really get off into the amazing stuff, which I have. I've done really uplifting books like Moving Mars, where to get away from a far future that is kind of pressing down on this new, young, freshly colonized planet, only 100 years old, they move the planet. And they find out a way to do that. For me, that's great fun to try and figure that out, because I didn't know how to do it when I started.
Well, that's an interesting point. To bring that back to the education context for you, Susan, is curiosity then, I mean, if he's not a raging optimist, does curiosity have to be a positive, fun thing for kids when they're looking at what it means to them or how to exercise that emotion? Or is it okay for it to range among the emotions?
Well, I think it has to be okay for it to range among the emotions, because one of the reasons that I think curiosity is so important is that we need young people and older people alike to be curious enough to find solutions to the hard problems and the hard questions, and that isn't always joyful and inspiring. Sometimes it's difficult, it's painful, it's hard work. However, I do think that one of the greatest things that we can do in education, and I saw this teaching down in Silicon Valley and early in my career. I had students who would say to me, I don't know what my major is going to be in college because it doesn't exist yet. You know, and this is back in the early 90s, and I had, you know, 16 and 17-year-olds who knew enough to know that they didn't know what the future held, but they were going to help shape it. And you know, many of them have gone off to do that. And so curiosity combined with some level of comfort with ambiguity and the unknown, I think is a really valuable skill set for folks to have.
So you see a direct link between curiosity at a child's age to what they end up becoming, and maybe the impact it has on the business climate or the economy generally.
Absolutely. One of the, and it's very interesting because, you know, in traditional schooling we're taught that it's important to get the right answer. You have to find the right answer. And I'll never forget, in my doctoral program, one of my advisors said to me, you'll soon learn that the most important thing about being here is not having all the answers, but rather asking the right questions. And the ability to question and be comfortable with the questioning and see where that leads you, I think is something that we can't put too high a premium on.
You do that in your books, Greg, don't you? You seem to, you take reality, or at least the books that I've read, you take reality and you twist it just a little bit so we can see a connection between our current existence, but you're pushing people to ask questions about that existence.
Well, you have to. I mean, if you're not asking questions, why are you alive? But also, you've got to get answers in time to avoid catastrophes. And science fiction can go back and forth between enthusiasm and between, you know, dire predictions, but in fact it's most effective quite often when it scares the heck out of us. And the classic example is 1984. You know, reading that book really transformed a lot of people into thinking about totalitarian states and how do we, you know, we just shy away from it. So we built up our immune response to the totalitarian ideal. And we shunned it. We moved away from it. Maybe it saved us. Other books like Brave New World, a little more difficult to figure that out. Is it a nasty place to live? I mean, it's got sex and drugs and music and all that
How
stuff
nasty
going on.
could it be?
Right, and yet at the same time, it makes us feel deeply uneasy about it. Maybe it's too much of a good thing, as you know. So all these things bring up really interesting questions and don't answer them thoroughly, and that allows you to make your own answers.
So does curiosity come? Is that an important component of curiosity then, that it should lead to more questions and it shouldn't necessarily lead to determine finite answers?
No, I don't like utopias. You know, this is the way it is going to be. It will last forever. It'll never change. Yeah. One of my favorite science fiction writers, Theodore Sturgeon, had a little pin that he wore, which was a Q with an arrow shooting off to one side, which was ask the next question.
Huh. How does that fit for you as an educator, Susan?
Well, I mean, as I said, I think that feeling comfortable with questioning and knowing how to pursue that is really important. You know, we see it every day in our schools. I mean, some of our students, just as an example, at Ballard High School actually submitted a science experiment that was accepted, and they sent E. coli bacteria up into space because they wanted to test what the effect on bacteria would be. And so, I mean, they had a question, and they came up with an experiment and you know, pursued it and, you know, had it accepted, and now have been able to follow up. I mean, that kind of questioning and then following through and giving, how do we give young people an avenue to see those questions play out, I think is one of our challenges.
You referred to your time in Silicon Valley, which is when you began your career, and you were actually in Cupertino, which is where Apple has its headquarters. If you had to look at any cultural differences in terms of innovation, education, curiosity between Silicon Valley, where Apple was, and where we are today here in the Pacific Northwest, are there any distinctions?
That's a good question. I think that having grown up in the Bay Area, one of the things I love about Seattle is I think there are a lot of parallels between this part of the country and that. You know, being in Silicon Valley in the early 90s was a fascinating place to be, and I think, as I told you, the high school where I started my career is where both Steve Wozniak and Steve Jobs graduated from. It was the school that they went to and where they met. And just as an aside, you know, when they decided to start Apple, they came back to the school to some of the teachers there to see if they wanted to maybe get in on the ground. This is the legend at the school. If they would want to get in on the ground floor, and none of the teachers said yes. And one of those, and I tell the story lightly, but I think it fits in the context here. One of those teachers was still there when I was teaching teaching, and I said, I'd remind him every once in a while. I said, "Do you still kick yourself? Do you?" But you know, but I.
It's like ignoring the Beatles. When
Well,
they
I
first
mean,
came out,
really,
right?
you know, so I said to my students, lesson learned for me is I don't want to be the person who didn't, you know, believe in a great idea that nobody thought was really possible. And I think it really says a lot that they were so ahead of their time that nobody could see what they saw actually coming to reality.
Speaking of Steve Jobs, we have his biography here, and I was reading it, and there's in the early pages, this line jumps right out, and it's very fitting for this show. And it says, Jobs revolutionized or reimagined 7 industries by standing at the crossroads of science and the humanities, connecting creativity with technology, and combining leaps of imagination with feats of engineering to produce new devices that consumers hadn't even thought of. Greg, when you think about that, when you think about your work in this region with companies and thinking about and reimagining the future of devices, is that marriage necessary, that sort of the artistic with the hard science, which you're so well known for?
Absolutely. You have to design an experiment, and you have to design it in a way so that it's harmonious and works twice, and that another person can reproduce it. So scientists have to be artisans and kind of creative artists and think how other people would approach this, because if it's not reproducible, you're not going to get in the journals. So science is design, science is art, science is imagination, science is also hard work. That's one of the hardest things for us to instill, is the transition between the dream and the persistence to get it done. So Steve was persistent. He persisted through being kicked out of Apple. He persisted in doing other stuff until Apple had to bring him back. He won, you know. He persisted through illness. We've seen that. You know, there's an amazing ability to survive the downturns and come out on top. That's one of the hardest things to educate. It's a sense of self-reliance and a sense of self-conviction.
And the science aside, I mean, the creativity and the perseverance and this idea that you actually have to be able to think the fiction side as well, which is what you do. When you think about that applied to some of the best things that come out of this region right now, it's not just about the science and technology, is it?
No, it's about the human interest. It's about making things that people want to use, that people can use. As one of the major laws, which is sometimes almost forgotten in software, is easy to use is hard to do. And we see that over and over again as we try to use different things. So why is Apple so good? Because many people find it intuitive, especially after early introduction in school, they find it intuitive to use that interface. It's elegant. They can work through it, and it doesn't frustrate them very often. Badly designed interfaces, cheap software, sometimes business software, this stuff is not made by people looking for easy to use, it's hard to do. So Steve's major talent was making it easy to use.
And yet here we are in the world of Microsoft here in the Pacific Northwest. You've done some work with Xbox, for example, and providing actually the prequel series to Halo with the Forerunner series of books that you're working on. Susan, when you even think about the pressures that you face in your position, I imagine that being surrounded by so many intelligent people who are engaged in the software industry here probably sort of forces you to think a little differently about education and innovation and curiosity as well.
Well, actually, I don't know that it has to the degree that it should. I think that we probably have not done as good a job as a school system of tapping into just the intellectual resources that exist in this region and helping others help us get smarter about education. And I think that now is the time for us to do it, especially in a challenging economy and dwindling budgets. How can we use this as an opportunity to innovate and bring in folks from other industries and other parts of the community who, by the way, all have a very genuine interest in having a strong education system, pre-K through 20 in the region. And how do we tap into that to get smarter about this? So I don't know that we've done as good a job there as we should.
Great. Well, I definitely want to get back to that. I think we will definitely later in the show. We're going to take a break right now. When we return, we'll speak more about enabling curiosity among kids and what happens when we don't. We'll be right back. The digital revolution has turned communications upside down. It poses challenges and opportunities to professionals seeking to influence and persuade. These are our students in the Master of Communication and Digital Media program, innovators who think entrepreneurially about how to engage communities through storytelling. As creative leaders, together we're charting the future of communication. Want to join us? Find out more at mcdm.uw.edu. Welcome back to Four Peaks here at the Pacific Science Center. We're talking about curiosity and how it drives innovation. So Susan and Greg, what happens if we don't enable curiosity, especially among kids?
Well, I think that in not doing that, we are putting limitations on young people that they may carry with them for the rest of their lives. I mean, if we don't keep that spark of curiosity alive, then they'll start believing that the impossible isn't possible. And I think that that's part of what curiosity is, that you believe that, and we keep that going.
The difficult part is you also have to socialize your children. So there can be boundaries that you don't want them to cross in this. In other words, curiosity is usually not allowed to be completely wide-ranging outside of anti-MAME. But you know, if we constrain and allow them to understand why those boundaries are there, and it's always a dangerous thing if you give totally unbridled curiosity. And yet, to some extent, every young person has to experience that in making your own mistakes and learning, you know, how to avoid areas where curiosity is not supposed to take you. That's the hardest part in teaching. For arts, for fiction, for writing and storytelling, we often allow the vicarious experience of areas you really don't want to go to. Or in nonfiction, you can read about other people screwing up horribly. And that becomes even more, you know, kind of cautionary.
At some point, though, you do want the young person to break out of that social circle, that parental bond, that curiosity drives them beyond. In fact, even in your most recent book, where you're talking about your main character, who actually has a really antagonistic relationship with his father, and actually that drives him to be the character that he has in the book,
he's got far too much curiosity, and it takes him to amazing places. And it leads him into an amazing life, but it's not the life he might have chosen had he been educated perfectly by his class, by his parents. These are the forerunners who built the giant halos. He's heir to a father who built these halos, who was a contractor who built these huge artificial worlds. How do you live with that? How do you live with that kind of discipline and the kind of social structure, very much like living among a bunch of English bridge builders in the 1840s?
Meanwhile, your son's writing books with you now,
That's
along
right.
with doing German longsword, I understand.
That's right. We hack at each other with longsword in the morning and then go off and plot and eat muffins in the afternoon. And that book is coming out from Amazon Publishing, 47 North this spring. And it'll be in 3 volumes because, you know, if we have me, my son, and Neil Stevenson, and a bunch of other writers, we end up writing 350,000 words, and it's 3 volumes over a year. So it's an impressive experience.
One of the things that you said is, Greg, that some of your work is about, science fiction really is about this should not go on.
Yes.
This is a chance to change the world. Susan, if we took that as a premise, we look at things like the Occupy movement or the Arab Spring that we're seeing in the Middle East. Do we ultimately want curiosity to drive innovation to the point that we should be changing the world, that it shouldn't be status quo? What role does the education system play in that?
Well, I think it plays a formal and an informal role. I mean, obviously, at its core, we can talk about nurturing curiosity and helping students pursue their own creative instincts, but we also have to make sure that they are literate, that they that they're readers, mathematicians, etc. So giving them a foundation by which they can then go out into the world and challenge the status quo and create the majors that don't yet exist and engage in the careers that don't yet exist, but that they will help make. So I think that formal education lends a foundation to what ends up happening. But I also think that in turn, we in public education are at a very interesting point in time where, as I alluded to before, I believe that we have to look outside the commonly accepted boundaries, if you will, within which traditional pre-K-12 education has functioned and start asking some questions.
What's an example of a really fundamental, hard question that we have to be asking right now about education?
I think that one of the biggest questions, and I think about this a lot, and I thought about it a lot in coming tonight, is this notion of how do we make sure that we are making sure that every student graduates from high school very savvy, critical consumers of media, good analytical skills and communication skills and all of that kind of thing. How do we make sure that every student graduates with that? So we need some kind of threshold that they all cross over and a diploma that really guarantees that they're ready for the world. But to get them there in ways that meet their unique needs. So how do we meet the needs of 48,000 plus students in a way that is unique to them, but guarantees some kind of a standard at the end of the day? So it's that balance, right, between having some common core practices, but allowing plenty of room for that creativity to come into play. And I think that's what we're grappling with a lot right now.
One of the ways, I think one of the strong movements we've seen in education lately, especially in this region, has been along the lines of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, STEM. And I believe that you've been involved with that. There's a high school in the Seattle school system that is focused entirely on STEM, Cleveland High School. Is that part of answering that question you've just raised?
I think it can be a part of it, and I think that there is what's happening at Cleveland is some incredibly exciting work. But I think it's bigger than that, and one of the things that that I hear from teachers and students is that they want more time to engage in creative work that is not just your traditional, and time is at a premium. We don't necessarily have it. So how do we look at the time that we do have and using it differently? I mean, I think that we're really at a place where, given the constraints on our system, the need to innovate is greater than ever.
Great. We have another question from our audience.
Right. I have Marjorie here.
Thank you. Thanks for a stimulating discussion. Thus far, when you've talked about curiosity, you've primarily talked about it in terms of the individual. So my question is, to what extent should curiosity also be something that's thought about as a collective enterprise, and both from an educational and a moral perspective? Thanks.
About that.
Well, we live in a revolutionary country, in a revolutionary culture. America is one of the most eternally questing and frustratingly curious countries in the world. Trying to run it is a nightmare because the game always changes. You can never pin people down. You certainly can't pin voters down. Just as you think you've got their number, they vote you out of office. And it's just, for me, this whole continual churning of curiosity, ask the next question, is our mantra. And yet we tend to be very critical about our approach to things because we think we're losing that curiosity. We think we're getting rigidified and locked in concrete boots. And sometimes that does happen among certain groups of people. And then they have questions thrown at them, and reporters come and criticize them, and they feel irritated, and writers write about them, and it starts all over again, the whole cycle.
Well, that's interesting. Actually, I was in China a couple months ago, and we were sitting down with a bunch of Chinese entrepreneurs and American entrepreneurs thinking about the future of China. And we were asked to predict headlines 10 years in the future. And the headline that came out first was that Chinese mothers tell their kids, study less, play more. And that was very interesting because we've become so focused here on science and technology and thinking more rigidly or more rigorously about what we do in our schools. And all of a sudden, the collective or the community there is saying, well, no, we've got to sort of think about this a little differently.
It's an interesting sort of twist, isn't it? Because for so long, I think that we perceived education in places like China as being all about rote learning and mastery, and not so much the creative side. That's
they want to be more like us now.
Exactly, yeah. And it's a very interesting flip. And one of the things that am really interested in, have been reading about, and it's still somewhat new to me, is this notion of STEAM. So how are we?
STEAM.
So science, technology, engineering, arts, and math. Or some are saying teams, technology, engineering, arts, math, and science. But getting the arts connected to the science, technology, engineering,
math. Is that a hard
math.
sell? I mean, because it seems to me, you got the Gates Foundation, you got all these corporations on board with STEM, because that seems to be, really easy, right? When you bring the arts back into it, and the arts have been seen squelched out of a lot of school systems.
From where I'm sitting, I don't think it's actually a hard sell. And what I've been reading is quite interesting in this notion that we know what an arts education can do for a child in terms of their development and their learning. It just makes them a better learner. And I was reading something that said actually infusing the arts into a STEM-focused environment is so important, because getting back to this notion of ambiguity and not having one answer, when you are analyzing a piece of literature or a piece of art, I mean, there is no one right answer there.
No.
And so how do you weave that into this the disciplines where there is at some point an answer, and helping students balance that.
I find it pretty interesting, actually, that neither of you have degrees in science. You've been looking at bringing STEM or STEAM to the Seattle school system, and Greg, you're a hard science fiction writer, and you don't have a degree in science.
No.
So how
English
important
major.
is this from an educational point of view if you're quite capable of functioning as well as you have in the
Well,
real
I'm not
world?
capable of functioning as an engineer or a software engineer in a hotbed environment of getting things done quickly. But what I do love to do is I love to go into Microsoft Research and talk to the engineers working there and the scientists working there. I love to be invited down to the SciFu, the Friends of O'Reilly Science Conference at Google, where they invite all the Google employees to come and hang out and listen to all of these people talking, going off into different rooms, picking weird topics to discuss. They really encourage this. Arts are very much a part of that. They do encourage an interest in the arts, and this need for math training and software training and engineering training is utterly essential. But they really need the other side, because that's where the innovation and problem solving comes.
And when you think about and all the different future realities that you've come up with as a writer, and you're looking at our region and all the things that we do, and how well do we mesh with maybe a more positive view of the future that you'd like to see for our region? Are we doing okay? Are we on the right track?
Yes, a moderately long answer. I was raised in San Diego, where all the billionaires eventually ended up in jail in the 70s, and it was fun watching that happen. Up here, I never met them. Within a year after we moved up here, we had met most of the would-be billionaires and billionaires in the community, because they were all science fiction, loved science fiction, or loved imagination. Or people were trying to foist us upon them, so that, at any rate, it was a real interesting difference. And I realized the innovation was up here. It's also similar to what I saw in Los Angeles, where also there's tremendous amount of innovation, but it's a show business, entertainment-oriented thing. But then in between is La Jolla. And La Jolla is like, Silicon Valley, except for biology. And then all of these West Coast, every part of the country has these centers of innovation where people who are creative are invited to come in and talk.
So you're feeling good about our innovation then in our region?
I really do, yeah. And they've been this way for 25, 30 more years. Boeing engineers love science fiction. They love imagination. They love thinking about going into space, because there's business up there.
And you see a direct correlation between that imagination connected to innovation.
Innovation, absolutely. If you're happy at being rich and don't want to do anything important, then you perhaps will end up in jail.
Or in San Diego. That's right. A question.
Perfect.
Yes, I actually have Bryce, who's the CEO of the Pacific Science Center, and I think that he wanted to follow on with a comment.
Well, first of all, I'm tremendously impressed with the conversation tonight, and in full agreement about the importance of this idea of curiosity and innovation. You've explored the issue of formal education, schools, school systems, teachers, and parents. Can you help us understand how we can broaden this effort of stimulating curiosity by engaging community organizations, perhaps like the Science Center and others, because this is a societal challenge, I think, that we can't count on happening by only looking at our formal education system.
Actually, I was having a conversation with some people in the community just last week about this very question, about how do we better connect the informal education structures that exist within our community with the formal education system. And I think that we've got pockets of that where we've made good connections between community-based organizations in the system, but looking at this notion of other entities and the informal education structures that they have and making that part of a larger infrastructure of education here in Seattle is something that I think we have yet to really tap into.
We actually I feel like we're quite well endowed with institutions and organizations in our region that nurture this.
We are. We've got enough dinosaurs. We may not have quite enough mummies, some down by the docks, not quite enough mummies in the museum.
We're getting King Tut here at the Science Center.
If we get King Tut, and he's actually King Tut and not just all his jewelry, we're good. But the fact is that we have to kind of listen to children as to what stimulates. And when their eyes go wide and they go, wow, bitchin', or whatever the phrase is today, sick.
I think that's very 80s, but yes.
We go across the ages in science fiction. If they say that is, that's amazing, I want to know more about that, then you know that you've connected to them. And sometimes it's not polite. You got a whole exhibition on gaseous discharge, and the kids love it. They just love it. So you attract attention that way. You've got, matter transmitters and how you should keep them clean. Otherwise, you end up like, poor Al Hedison over here. So we have to kind of realize that the children guide us as to what they're willing to accept. And there's a great continuity in that. Many children like things, A, that are not found at home, B, that are kind of disgusting, that are really disturbingly thought-provoking, like mummies or dinosaurs. And all of that stuff, what they can't imagine in their lives leads them outside of their daily lives. And that's why these displays and these exhibits and these museums and these, these works of art, stories, movies, all these things really give our kids an incredibly rich environment to springboard from.
All right. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll talk about curiosity in our everyday lives. We'll be right back. We're back at the Pacific Science Center with Four Peaks and the notion of curiosity and innovation. Well, we're talking about curiosity. Let's talk about our own lives and how we managed to nurture this emotion. Susan, I understand that despite the fact that you're in a very serious position, managing 47,000 young minds, you have a duck-infested office.
I
Is
do.
that true?
It is
What is
true.
with you and ducks?
What is it with me and ducks? Well, my father, for reasons he cannot remember, started calling me Duck at a very young age, and it stuck. Nobody but he ever called me that until I had one job where my boss thought it was hysterical and, in fact, threatened to have duck calls at my wedding. She did not do that. But I came back from my honeymoon and my office was ducked out. And so once you have a critical mass of something, you carry it. The decor at home doesn't lend itself to the ducks. And actually, it's had a nice unintended impact, which is when people walk into a leader's office with certain preconceived expectations. Someone likened it once to that scene in It's a Wonderful Life where Jimmy Stewart goes to meet with Mr. Potter in that horrible office, and he's sitting in this low seat.
Yeah,
exactly,
yeah.
exactly. And it sets a tone of welcome and wonder and a focus on children.
Wonder.
which is why-
Aren't you worried that people won't take you seriously?
No,
Okay. So
that doesn't bother me.
I don't know if this is even unique compared to the other ducks that you have, but we're giving this to you. Okay, there's your Four Peaks duck. Greg, you've done it all. You've written it all. No duck for you.
Never get ducks.
No duck for you. How do you? If you've imagined everything you could possibly imagine in all the various books that you've written and all the scenarios that you've set, how do you keep curiosity going?
Because I don't know any of the answers. The more I learn, the less I know. It's a very simple equation. One of the fun things I have is talking to scientists is asking them, what do we not know? Where will the innovation come next? Where will the big thing come next? And I was on a panel at a science fiction convention where there were two rather conservative physicists over here. We were talking about faster than light travel and time travel. Is it possible? And they said, no, we know everything important. And over here were the real physicists who said, no, we don't know everything. And I was in between, and I actually kind of got in trouble at one point. And then 2 weeks later, we have this neutrino controversy. Neutrinos that travel faster than light. And I'm suddenly finding myself being the conservative who's saying, well, I think that's going to be, I don't know, that's too good. It's too good. So,
That's all right. You just swallowed a fly. Are you okay?
You all right?
I don't know why. But having dinosaurs around, I realize why there are so many, and then this guy, there's so many flies around here. But this whole neutrino thing, if I may buzz off onto a different topic, it just proves to us that science is hungry for the next thing, because it's a way to make your career and get a Nobel Prize.
And it keeps you engaged after all these years.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go back to a question.
Yeah, I think Kelly wants to know how we make that all happen.
Yeah, so earlier you had touched on kind of how you can best take advantage of the free time that we do have. And, there really is a press for time everywhere. We all have full-time jobs, we have families, we have obligations inside and outside of work. Yet I think we all feel that need to want to have a sense of wonder and to want to be curious and teach that to others. So what are some things that we can all be doing to keep that ignited within us and to take advantage of that time?
It's a great question. Our lives are so congested. My best thinking and curiosity is on an airplane, but now there's internet on the airplane, so that sort of cancels that out. What do we do? How do we practice this?
That's a good question.
Carve aside private time.
Yeah.
You absolutely have to get away from the social networks. You've got to get away. You've got to be alone at least 2 or 3 hours a day. And not just when you're about ready to go to sleep. You know, if you can manage it, take a walk, go out someplace that's different from your everyday environment, and just go out there and isolate yourself. Don't answer your email for 2 hours. They can wait. You know, avoid Twitter. We are so compelled to be constantly connected, especially if family is on Twitter and, you know, and they get offended if we don't answer within 3 minutes. What, you don't love us anymore? We need to be alone. We need to think who we are, because that's the moment when we refresh our connection to everything around us and rethink who we are in relation to other people and other problems. So being alone is my solution. If I don't have at least 3 hours just to goof off, I hardly have time to get any writing done. I need 3 hours to get prepared.
Greg, actually, your comment about sort of being alone is actually really important. You actually gave a talk here at the Pacific Science Center in 2010 at TEDx Seattle, where you commented on too much information, and you said that we're not being allowed to become teenagers or be teenagers anymore because our privacy is being so infringed upon by all these social networks. So
well,
that ability
goof off.
to cut away, right? Not to be observed all the time, not to be judged all the time.
It's not just teenagers, though. We all make mistakes. If we are punished to the full extent of the law for every single mistake we make, every time we make a mistake, then you're throwing sand into the gears of society. Because, you know, too much punishment, too much judgment, too much being watched making mistakes really does grind you down. And in a sense, that's why we kind of have to watch this, especially for being teenagers, is teenagers make mistakes. Do we lock them up as adults for every single mistake they make, or punish them as adults? Do we push it back to when they're 9 or 10 years old? Well, you can't make mistakes. We screw up. That's how we learn. That's how we grow. And sometimes we do dangerous things and wrong things. We've all done it.
It's that notion of failure, doesn't it?
Well, it does, and actually, true innovation and creativity requires time. And, you know, I am one of the guiltiest parties at overscheduling myself. You know, I have no time in the day that isn't taken up with meetings or something, and that's my bad, and my team is trying to train me otherwise. And actually, I was thinking about it in coming here tonight, that to do the kind of creative, strategic, innovative thinking that I believe all of us, but I think from my world, our education system is really needing right now, requires time. And I think you're right. It's carving it out, not feeling guilty about it, and seeing it as an essential part of the work.
So for everybody watching this show, they're convinced that curiosity is fundamental to our economy, to how our children grow up. If there was an exercise or something they could practice, if people go home tonight, they can say, yes, I'm making my curiosity better, right? Sort of a boot camp for curiosity. Is there anything we could do?
Boot camp for curiosity. Now, there's
that.
you not let them sleep for 24 hours, and then you'd say, now observe your inner brain processes.
Not let them sleep. Not let them touch a screen.
Not let them touch a screen.
Right. Yeah.
No video games.
Lose them in a blind canyon until they're utterly terrified.
No depressing Greg Beard novels.
No depressing any novels. I mean,
No
my
standardized
gosh.
tests.
I'm depressing. Let's talk about Holden Caulfield. But yeah, and in a sense, that's kind of what children's literature is all about, is giving them the vicarious experience of losing control. The real experience is terrifying, and sometimes actually shuts them down. So parents are there to allow them the safety of experiencing to the limit of not being truly terrified, but sometimes you can't prevent that from happening. What you do when that happens is another talent, which parents and teachers and so on, counselors.
Well, how about adults?
Adults need it as much as children. Yeah. Here's my thing about change in your life and new additions and so on, is we all rewrite ourselves as we learn and make mistakes and go through terrifying things. Sometimes we have to rewrite ourselves so extensively we can't remember who we were, and that can be dangerous. Talk about PTSD, which can occur not just in troops,
Post-traumatic stress
but in students and in teachers and in all sorts of situations. I mean, we all have to experience the realities of this. As we come out in a new edition, are we correcting our past mistakes? Are we revising? Are we improving our style? Are we changing a few words here and there and being happy with what we were? That's the experience of being an individual. All of our lives reflect all of these possibilities.
So my question is, now that you're talking about fostering curiosity in our community, are there ethical dilemmas that we must discuss or consider, particularly with children? You talked earlier about there's certain restrictions or places where curiosity shouldn't take us, but are there more specific examples that where really we have to consider those limits and how we shape or how we create an environment of curiosity, healthy curiosity?
What do you guys think? Ethics?
I think
Ethics.
that's kind of your
ethical
area.
boundaries.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. In fact, I was sharing the break an example of I was at Cleveland in one of our classrooms a few weeks back, and the teacher was helping students get familiar with Photoshop and manipulating images on the computer. And the method he used to get them engaged was a photo of himself that they had to manipulate to be as ugly as they could be. So of course the kids were loving this, right? I get to totally tool on my teacher and make him warts and all. But what great teachers do, and I didn't stay for this, but I know that he talks to them about this, are the ethics of this. So you have this capability, this skill. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. What are the appropriate boundaries for this? And especially in the media, with Photoshop, with digital manipulation of images, how do we engage students in those ethical conversations of where the boundaries are? Because there do have to be boundaries, as you said.
It's a great point, actually. Because of our access to technology, as we enable our curiosity, especially now, we have incredible power. And that power reaches well beyond our immediate social circles. Greg, you must probably think about this all the time in terms of what you can do with this technology to enable your curiosity, what it means maybe from an ethical, philosophical point of view.
Well, it really does, because the classic dilemma in science fiction is what can you do, what should you do, what does God want you not to do? All these questions come up. Well, the classic is Frankenstein, where the ethics of Frankenstein can lead to multiple discussions, because who's the monster here? Is it the scientist who creates the monster and then is so frightened of this creation that he doesn't raise him right? And the monster is super sensitive and brilliant and a superhuman being in many respects. Being badly raised goes wrong. That's an ethical dilemma which isn't often explored in the common conception of Frankenstein's monster.
Question.
Yeah, I have Brooke.
So we've talked a lot about encouraging curiosity amongst kids and the 48,000 students here in Seattle. But I'm more curious about encouraging curiosity amongst professionals. And even those teachers or others amongst us who work in creative industries. How do we keep encouraging that curiosity amongst us so we all learn and grow?
That's a tough question. Professionals get sort of locked into what they do best, become a little conservative as they get higher and higher up that career ladder. How do we keep that sense of childlike wonder, I guess, as they continue to work?
Where would Arthur Miller have his career if we'd done that throughout the generations? Death of a Salesman. A man who has no more imagination. It's been knocked out of him by his life. He can't imagine being anything different, and now they don't want him. If you can't reimagine yourself, if you can't find a place where you remain private in your profession and create yourself and recreate yourself, you're heading for a bad moment, if not a bad ending. And I think the continuing education is part of the answer. Continuing exposure, libraries, book groups, anything to keep yourself active and curious all the time.
But it is becoming more of a challenge to separate professional from private, given the social technologies, given that we're on Twitter and Facebook at work and we're thinking, and our lives and our work lives are becoming more expansive. So how do we, is it a question just divorcing the two and keeping curiosity out of one and keeping it in the other, or do we have the two mix?
I don't know that you can relegate curiosity to one realm of your life. I think that it should be in both your personal and your professional life. I think getting to this question of how do we, in our profession, continue to grow and learn and push ourselves, I think hinges on constantly seeing the opportunities that present themselves to you and being willing to go off course. You think you're on a path, you know what you're doing, an opportunity comes along, maybe a little scary, a little bit different, seeing where that might take you. But I also think too, and how do we provide opportunities across sectors to learn from one another? I know that some of the greatest, most inspiring learning opportunities that many of our educators in the system get is when they partner with private industry, right, and go in and learn what's really happening and take that back to their work.
What are some of the private industries here in this region you think would really benefit from that cross-pollination, or vice versa?
You know, it's a really good question, because I think from where I sit on a daily basis, I'm always thinking about what opportunities can we provide for our staff to learn and grow, and how does that lead to partnerships with industry. I've never thought about it from the other side in terms of what can we as educators help. I think it's a really good question, actually. I'm going to take that one home and think about it tonight. No, I really am. I mean, because we all have this, we all share, I believe, a real vested interest in our children and in the future of our community, our society, in how we educate them, well or not. And I think that there's a lot that we can learn from one another, and as you said quite well, Greg, from our kids.
Yeah.
And are we listening to the children?
From the students.
Yeah.
When we become students, we have to learn from ourselves and from our teachers.
Yeah.
And that gets almost Cohen-like at some point. So,
Greg?
Yeah, I think Dana has a sort of a global question for us.
So I've been spending a lot of time thinking about my kids and imagining their future, and I'm starting to wonder what's our best investment, our overall investment. In the 1950s, we had Sputnik. Do we need a contemporary Sputnik, something really big, or are we okay with smaller scale pieces that we can fit together?
Is this the kind of, I mean, it seems like Sputnik, I mean, it's come up so much lately in terms of we need this massive fear of the other to motivate us to do anything constructive in our society. Do we need another Sputnik?
no, we need an alien invasion. That'll really set us up. That's another classic thing. You know, we really get our game going when the aliens drop by and say, we're going to eat you all, you know. I think Sputnik was marvelous. We always have Sputnik moments. It's just that, you know, as the society gets either richer and perhaps more sedate and more self-satisfied, our Sputnik moment right now is, oh my gosh, what have we done to our economy? What's our responsibility to creating new opportunities for those who don't have them? What's our responsibility for doing this? This was our Sputnik moment in 1929 and in 1885 and 1906 or whenever all these things occurred. We have these cyclical moments where we have to pull ourselves up short, argue, scream at each other, get really furious, set two crazy groups opposed to each other, and let them, you know, fight it out while the politicians are screaming and running and hiding in between. That's what we do. That's what Sputnik was all about, because we had become sedate. Yeah. We're living in the nuclear age and the space age, and the Russians beat us? Well, yes, we do need the Russians. But the Chinese are going out there next. They're going to land on the moon. What's that going to do for us? I think it's great for both of us. I really do. I think that it's almost like a sports competition. Instead of going to war, we go into space.
Susan, we began this show with Greg. I give you the last word.
Well, you know, I do think it's worth noting that both of us were English majors. And yes, Greg's a writer, but clearly his work is much bigger than that. I mean, he has a lot of interests and has pursued a lot of different paths and interests in the course of his career. And, you know, as an English major who decided to go into teaching, my career has now gone down some very interesting paths as well that have taken me beyond the classroom. And I think, though, what it comes back to, and I think it hinges along this notion of curiosity and education in our future, is it comes down to finding what you love to do and are passionate about. And that is what will spark the real innovation. So how can we help our young people find something that they just love? You know, I said to a group of high school, I gave the baccalaureate address to a group of high school students when I was teaching, and I said, you know, I wish for you moments like these in your life where you have not even a shred of doubt that you're doing what you're meant to do. So let's hope that our students and our young people can innovate, but innovate with passion.
Those are great, final, inspiring words. Thank you very much. And Greg and Susan, thank you for your time and for sharing your thoughts with us. And thank you all for joining us here at Four Peaks at the Pacific Science Center. And we invite you to join us again and extend your reach. Thanks very much.